Okay, welcome everybody. This week we're going to finish Roman art, and we'll also see some of the slides. It'll be Wednesday when I do this. I'll show you a few of my slides, the best ones of several trips to Rome. I've been there 4 times, I think. And over the years, these are slides that I have gleaned out of those other collections of my own original 35 millimeter Kodachrome with a non-digital camera, of course, but the quality of those will be, I think you'll agree, interesting and, clear enough for you to find some kind of a helpful idea of what it would be like to walk through the streets of ancient Rome, when it was the capital of, frankly, the Western world at that time, at least 3 continents anyway. And so we'll get to that Wednesday. First, a couple of announcements of things. So I call this house cleaning, which is based on the fact that you've got some deadlines coming up. First, backtracking. Last night, I sent everyone their grades. And if you had attached the cover sheet to your paper in the same PDF, either I or my reader, most of them was with my readers, I check all her work. She's been doing this for me for over 3.5, 4 years now. She took the same courses that you're taking, 2 of them from me years ago. Anyway, the point being that would give you a clearer indication of how you got the grades you got. And overall, the grades were quite good. But if you didn't get an A or a B, which is true for, not just one person in each class, that always is the case. It isn't a time for discouragement or becoming discouraged, because it's early on in the semester. So how I like to tell my students to look at this, if you got a lower grade on your first paper or the midterm, either one, than you hoped to get, than you're aiming for, which isn't everyone aiming for an A or at least a B. If you got lower grade than that, don't give up, because you've got, first of all, you'll know because of the notes that I or the reader who graded your paper or your exam will send you. I can't give them to you in person because we're not meeting in person, but you'll get an explanation of what was missing and why some points were reduced or deducted, I should say, why the grade was reduced the way it was, and some suggestions for how to recover from that. But I obviously, as an individual, I'm not going to do that on these group Zoom sessions at all, of course. But if you send me an email with any questions after you've gotten your grade, usually it's clear why you got the grade you got from the comments and the marks, in each category of the cover sheet, right? As to what exactly you were missing. It's pretty easy to make up for that by two things. One is on the second paper, make sure you don't overlook those items. You spend more time. Most of the problems were of the few papers that did get lower grades than an A or B in this first batch would be who took too little time, too little effort, whatever, or focus on the formal analysis, and they either rushed through it or they didn't even do all the elements, or they only mentioned them and didn't analyze them. This is not a class, and of course, just listing things. Obviously, that's what we covered with this second week, was it, or third week? I can remember, where we did the 9 elements of composition. So if you missed that lecture and you wrote your paper without seeing it, don't do that for the second paper. Go back and watch that. I think it's week 3 actually in this class. I believe that's right, where it says the topic for the week, including 9 elements of composition. That's on YouTube. It's easy to watch 24/7. You can go and rewatch that in case there's any questions you might have about, well, how come I didn't, cover these carefully enough, or what was I missing? So that's my advice, is if you do get a lower grade on in either of the 2 papers, usually it doesn't work that way, though. If someone gets a lower grade on their first paper, all the years I've been teaching with this same method now, over 25 years at this JC, people almost always do better on their second paper. That is if they take the time, of course, to realize what they're missing. Okay, let Serena in. You haven't missed anything. We were just talking about, the options for, I gave the grades back to everyone who actually turned their paper in on time. I've now got, I think it's 2 people. So there should be at least 4 more, because we have 14 enrolled. That's the current number that I should be getting soon. And at this point, those papers will be graded certainly before the midterm. I can't promise exactly when, because I've got other classes coming in with meeting their deadlines for their first papers. And one class has already taken its midterm. And I have to start grading those this week. So the point is that if you turned your paper in on time, you got your grade, you should be able to see why you got the points totals and the grade that you ended up having. And if you missed something, it should be easy to figure out what it was. And if you still have questions, you can email me, of course, at any time, or voicemail if you prefer that. I'm happy to do live phone, consultations. It's part of our job, and it's what I consider part of my extended office hours. As long as you give me 24 hours to get back to you, right, by either voicemail or email. So that's one option, is to make sure you do better in your second paper. The test is the same thing, but you haven't had a test yet. So we're going to review for that next week. And the test is on the 16th of March. You probably noticed that. You should have looked ahead. If you haven't, I'm just giving you a heads up. So you've got some time. We've got time to go over how the test is going to be given, what to study, what not to study, how it's going to be graded. We'll do all of that next week. On Monday. Well, it'll be the whole session Monday. Okay, we might even do a little preliminary part of it on Wednesday, depending on how far we get with our slides of the last part of Roman art. And then the other way to make up for missing points on any assignment, whether it's either the two papers or the midterm, the final's too late, because that's the last time I have anything from you to grade, is extra credit. Nobody's done more than, let me just double check here. In fact, I'm not going to read anyone's names out. Of course, that's not appropriate. But just get an idea of what the range of so far point totals that I've gotten. I don't believe anybody's come close to in fact, I'm sure of this, to the total, although a couple people have gotten 20 points. In fact, it's only one person, and one or two people have 5. It's an easy way to make up for any missing points from an assignment maybe you didn't do as well as you wanted to. So let me get more centered here. So very many options. I've already gone over them, but if anyone has any questions, at any point during the whole semester, it's fine to ask before the slide lectures start or at the end of each class. As you all know by now, I stick around as long as people have questions after the lecture's over, each Zoom class. But if you have any questions right now, anybody, about extra credit, because I think I'm going to do, this will be firmed up before the end of, or by the end of spring break. So the latest you'll hear a definite answer to this is, I'm kind of excited. I think for the first time in over 2 years, I'm going to do a walking tour, because it should be safe by late May, assuming the trends continue with, COVID and all that. And the restrictions are what they are. They're being lifted almost everywhere. Of course, if we're going, in other words, this would be a 20-point option, and you don't have to do anything but show up and attend, and you get 20 points. That would be on a Sunday in May in Berkeley from 2 to 4:30. I'll have a teaching assistant there to take the names. And yes, there is a small fee. See, it's not, I want to be clear about this, it's not a Santa Rosa JC activity. That would be a different thing. You'd have to have paperwork. I used to do those years ago that way, and field trips and things where people had to, sign some kind of waiver. That's not what this is. This is an activity I've been doing for decades for people who have an interest in art and architecture, particularly historic homes, that they would never otherwise get a chance to go into and see, where the owners are happy to share the history of their home. And each one is maybe a 15-20 minute view, and then a walk in between an historic neighborhood. Berkeley's full of historic houses. Some of you know this from perhaps just looking, on your own. But this is an organized tour where I'll be, of course, the tour guide, and you would meet at a designated starting point. Surely in May, well, who knows? Maybe it'll rain, but assuming the weather usually is sunny, it's a good time of the year, and it will be before final exams week, of course. So that's worth 20 points. If you show up, and the fee is $20 a person. That's not even half of what the heritage groups charge for the same kind of tour. They charge like $45-50 a piece, which is okay. I have members of 3 here in San Francisco, Oakland, and Berkeley. I've been active members of all 3 heritage groups, architectural heritage groups, for, gosh, I don't know how long, since I was a student myself, in graduate school, at least that far back. So this is an optional activity. That's just one extra way you can earn extra credit. It's not on the syllabus because, well, I mentioned it might happen. I think I did say, if conditions allow, but I think they will. I'll be able to tell you before the end of March, and then I'll send emails and reminders, and then you can decide how you want to proceed. So if you did that, you get 1/3 of your total extra credit points in one activity. Otherwise, you have all these others. Everyone knows 5 points for articles, 10 points for museums or architectural visits on your own with proof that you were at a certain site, and 15 points for downloading either one of my 2 art-themed novels, and then 10 points for writing a short essay about 2 pages roughly. It needs to be more than 1 page, so about 2 pages on any documentary or live action movie, not cartoons, about the life of an artist or any artistic movement. Even I think I've broadened it a bit to say you could watch a documentary on Impressionism as long as it's at least an hour long, 60 minutes or more, and write 2 pages, you get 10 points. I think I've covered the main. I think that's it. But anybody have any questions now before we proceed with the lecture about extra credit or grading in general? Anybody? Because of course you can ask those whenever they occur to you, but I just thought I'd check. All right, so let's go ahead and get started with our first must-know slide. And this first slide is of a site that is affecting all of really the whole world still to this day. Now, where did this, it went off the screen, I guess. All right, I'm going to have to backtrack. It's not going to take long. For some reason, the share thing, I pulled it up too soon, I guess. I didn't know that they only stay up a while. I've never had that happen. Okay, just give me about 90 seconds here. And we're going to see the remaining Roman art from the latter Roman Empire, the period after Augustus. Okay, and there are several more must-knows, so we're not going to rush through them. We don't need to. We're in good shape time-wise. We're actually doing quite well. So here it is. This is the slide that we need to have. Okay, let me get rid of the background so we can get back to where I can do screen share. And that should just take a few seconds. There we go. Okay, let's get it full size. Okay, can everybody see this slide?
Yes.
Good, thank you. Thanks.
Yep.
All right, it's our first must-know for today. And I have my own slides of this that are even more evocative because they're more closer up in detail, but this is a good professional quality slide from one of the slide library sources we have at the JC, I think, or maybe it's from the internet. Anyway, it's an important topic. I won't cut this one probably from the study list. It's our first must-know for today. Okay, this is the Arch of Titus. Arch, of course, just like it always spelled, it's 3 words. Arch of Titus, and Titus, he was a Roman emperor. Is Titus, Titus, Arch of Titus. Location should be obvious. It's Rome, but if it isn't, definitely you want to write this the way it is on the syllabus, of course, Rome. And the date, 81 AD or CE, if you prefer. Okay, so just by, if you recall, as some of you I'm sure do, that we talked about Augustus being the first Roman emperor, and he was over a century earlier. He became the first Roman emperor in about 30 BC, before the Common Era. So we're looking at something that's now, well past the early period of the Roman Empire, but it's still at the point where it's called, this is part of the meaning, that this arch was created during the Pox Romana. So that is a term that I'll spell for you because it's not on the list of terms, which we do have at least one more definition. I think it's just one more for this topic of Roman art that we haven't covered yet, but I'll get to it in a minute. First, about what does that mean, Pox Romana? This was constructed during the period of the Roman Empire known as Pox, P-A-X, Romana, 2 words, of course, capital R-O-M-A-N-A. Pox Romana was the 200-year period of peace and prosperity that was, you could say, ushered in or started, if you prefer, under Augustus Caesar. So here it had been going on for over a century. What that means is the Roman Empire had expanded to nearly its maximum size, and it was at its height of power and prosperity, and that no other empire threatened it. There was battles on the borders of the empire. Of course, that constantly would happen in the ancient world with any empire. So it doesn't mean they never fought a war, but never were during that 200 years, which is roughly the first 200 years of the Common Era, roughly, somewhere up to about 180. So what is that? That's from 30 BC when Augustus became the first emperor until about 180 when the last Pox Romana emperor died. That period, that's over 200 years, is called Pox Romana. So this is part of it. It's right in the middle of that high point of Roman power. Their golden age, if you want to call it that, you could say it that way in your notes, or if this is on the exam, as part of the meaning. It was constructed during the golden age of the Roman Empire, during the Pax Romana. Well, what is this object? Okay, here's your first and only definition for this week. It's a triumphal arch. Triumphal arch. Now that word's on your syllabus. I meant your list of terms to know. So you should be able to just scroll down with your eyes and you'll see it. It's below that list of things invented. I forgot to put the S there, didn't I? Sorry, multiple 6 items we covered last week, things invented by ancient Romans, and we already defined aqueducts. So these are terms that could appear, of course, on the midterm, and I'll explain how. I'll go give you a bit of a heads up. That would be in a true false section where I write out definitions that are similar to or exactly the same as the ones I gave you for several terms. And if they're correct, those definitions are accurate, then that's true. And if they're not, they're false. We'll discuss that more when we do the review for the midterm. So here we go. The only definition for this week now, triumphal arches. Okay, or a triumphal arch. You could even just say singular. Triumphal arch was a large stone archway constructed to commemorate a Roman military victory. This is during Roman times. Now I'll get to what that has to do with modern times in a minute. Okay, I'll say it again. The first half of the definition is a large stone archway constructed by, well, you could say constructed to, commemorate a Roman military victory. A large stone archway constructed to commemorate a Roman military victory, underneath which the soldiers who won that victory would march. Underneath which the soldiers who won that victory would march. So it was a big celebration, of course, therefore, and a monument to mark that celebration of a major Roman victory. Not every battle, but something really important. Well, this one is probably it's one of the two most important Roman military victories, and therefore this triumphal arch is one of the two most important ever created by the Romans. I'll say why in a minute. Anybody need me to repeat any part of that definition of triumphal arch or arches? Anybody? Good. Okay, so we're going to see a close-up of it in just a minute, but I want you to see the whole thing first, because the Romans only constructed this part here to the cornice line. It's a good word to know for architectural writing, but you won't have to use it on the exam. That's the cornice line. That's always the top of the wall, at the roof line, if you want to call it, because there's no roof here, obviously, just the top of this archway. That's all marble. This was added about 300 years ago by a pope. It's nothing to do with the Roman Empire. And it does mention the Senate and something of the people of Rome, but this part was added later by a pope who was, trying to connect somehow with the image of, the power of the Roman Empire. So probably you could just say a few centuries ago. The part above the cornice line is not original. So in 81 AD, this was the entire archway monument here. This is the actual archway. Remember, the Romans were credited, well, you don't have to remember this, but the Romans were for a long time, for many years, you could say, there was a misstatement of many historians thought the Romans invented the rounded arch, this kind of arch. They didn't. We know the Etruscans had them before that. But they made things out of the rounded arches that nobody before them had done. For instance, no one had used triumphal arches. Now, before we proceed with the exact meaning of what victory does this, because that's the most important part of the meaning of this slide and how it affects every one of us, at least you'd have to say in quote, the Western world, unquote. If you lived in Europe or North America or even Latin America, this monument has an effect on your future, your life. This monument, I hope that makes some of you go, huh? I'll explain it. I'm not exaggerating when I say that. But before we get to that detail, important part of the meaning, it is not something you have to write. Does anybody know, or can you think anybody of triumphal arches, or should I just ask, are there any triumphal arches in the modern world created, say, in the last couple hundred years or less? Anybody? Anybody's seen news from other countries like parts of Europe or on the East Coast of the United States? Anybody? Does anybody think there are any?
No,
yeah, sorry. Yes, I think you said it. Paris.
The one in Paris and then the one in New York. I don't remember the name of it for the life of me. But
excellent. But those are the two I was thinking of. Yeah, the Arch of Triumph is a French phrase meaning a triumphal arch. Literally is that phrase we just defined for you. But of course, those aren't Roman soldiers. That was Napoleon that created that in the early 1800s, but it actually wasn't finished till, you have to know any of this. That is the largest triumphal arch in the world, that one. Do we have everybody? Is anybody's not? Oh, okay. I thought one more person might have wanted to join us. All right. So triumphal arches exist in the modern world, and it's an echo of the ancient Roman concept. Yeah, the one in Paris is, oh gosh, about 200 feet tall. Well, more like 150 feet tall. It's huge. And you may have seen a famous photo from World War II. Gosh, I hate to say the parallels. I won't go there, but of Nazi soldiers marching under it when they took over Paris in 1940, and the French citizens lining the streets in tears, of course, as we see happening in a certain part of Eastern Europe now. Anyway, so you see that's still a factor. It's still a phenomena, you can say, or a kind of structure that modern governments built. And yeah, the one in New York is a little different. I think it was dedicated to the Spanish-American War, so it had some kind of military meaning, but now it's just a backdrop for rom-coms, movies and things set in New York. When Harry Met Sally, if you ever saw that movie, there's a whole scene there. It's pretty famous because it's just become a landmark now. It doesn't have anything to do with military history, that people don't think of it that way. But the one in Paris, the Parisians are still thinking of that in its military context. That Napoleon conquered an empire that was actually, if he'd taken all of Russia, would have been bigger than Hitler's. And he was not exactly a good guy. But anyway, they have a monument to him because it's there, and it's so massive, they weren't going to take it down. It's right in the middle of Paris. Yeah, the Arch of Triumph. Okay, so now let's talk about the exact meaning of this one. This was, back to now, where you should take notes at this point on the meaning. This arch was constructed to celebrate the fall of Jerusalem to the Roman army. A couple of years earlier, actually. I think it was like 2 years earlier, but it takes a while. I mean, news took months to travel from one end of the empire to the other, right, back then, as well as, of course, building the monument. It took a while. So a victory over the Jewish rebels, the Israeli kingdom that was under Roman rule then in the early Common Era, rebelled against the Romans. And it took 3 years, but the Roman army brutally crushed that rebellion and expelled all the Jews. That is what I mean when I say that this monument still has echoes and affects us to this day. Here's the detail that it almost seems like I ought to show you this slide if it's on, I'm not saying it will be, but if it's on the midterm, because this explains what I'm saying. This is the temple of Jerusalem, right? The largest building in Jerusalem, the capital of what once was first it was a separate kingdom, and then the Romans conquered it, so it became a Roman province, of course, and they didn't like that. The Jewish population rebelled. They never really accepted Roman authority fully, but when they rebelled, they were crushed, as the Romans always did when they brought their army in. So what did they do? They trashed. The word is sacked. That's really the only right word. I assume you've heard that, and let's hope we don't see that happen, but we probably will in Kiev. Sacked, right? That's the only way to write it in your notes. The night that the Jewish temple, the Temple of Jerusalem, you just called that. Of course, it was Jewish. The Temple of Jerusalem was sacked. The Roman army not only destroyed most of that, city, and expelled. First of all, they massacred the fighting age population, and or sold them into slavery, and then the women and children and some of the older men and were exiled from what was once their own home province, their home kingdom. And that is the root of the Arab-Israeli conflict. Now I don't have to explain why I say that this event affected, obviously, the next 2,000 years of Western history. But what this shows is the last part of the meeting now is what's going on here. It's pretty intense. What you see here is a menorah, right? M-E-N-O-R-A. If you're Jewish, you know this word. You have friends who are. Maybe you don't. Then just say a multi-headed candelabra, if you want to say, or there's no other way to say that, right? It's a menorah, which is a sacred object. It's solid gold. That was the largest object, or one, that's not necessarily but one of the largest objects in the Temple of Jerusalem that the Romans stole. When they sacked the city, they just stole everything in sight that was valuable they could carry off. But this here might look a little bit like something from a film with Steven Spielberg's famous, right? Some of you know about I'm going to see if anybody can guess. An object that's been sought after for centuries since the fall of Jerusalem that disappeared that night, that very night. And here it is, the last time it was ever seen in public was that night. And that's what this is. Anybody guess what I'm talking about here?
The Holy Grail.
That's a good guess, but no, it's something bigger and much more
different.
The other,
I know what it is, but my brain is not.
Yeah,
the word is.
Is it the spear?
Yeah. Okay. Spielberg's movie began with the word Raiders. The movie about this object, Raiders.
Raiders of the Lost
spear
Ark.
that,
Lost Ark.
The Ark of the Covenant. Yeah, that's the last part you should be writing now. No, it's not. It's not a myth. It existed. Now, whether it could melt Nazis or any other evil people, I doubt that. But that's what the myth says about it. It was a giant box with supposedly fragments of the original 10 commandments. But you can just keep it simple and say the Ark of the Covenant, the holiest object in Israel, and specifically in the temple, was kept there for thousands of years, of course, was stolen that night. And whether it was because it was a golden box, the box was solid gold, whether the Romans melted it down, sold it, fenced it, lost it, we don't know. It disappeared that night. So that is another connection with more recent history. And well, actually, not just the Western world. There are archaeological expeditions, even from China and other places in Asia, that have sought this object. It could have gone anywhere. Nobody knows. It disappeared that night. And there is an image of it being carried on the shoulders. It's so heavy. You see that? Of Roman soldiers who aren't in uniform anymore. They don't need to be. They've already killed everybody that was a fighting age or sold them off into slavery. So this was the night they sacked, S-A-C-K-E-D, if you didn't know that word, the Temple of Jerusalem, and stole all the valuable objects, including the Ark, A-R-C, of course, of the Covenant. And just spell that how it sounds. I've had a couple students say, is this a camera? Yeah, film at 11, live coverage, breaking news, right? No, it's the Roman standard for one of the legions, whichever legion was allowed to take over this temple and steal everything in sight. So you see what I mean about this structure having affected the history of the Western world. Some would say the whole world for, 2,000 years. The event that occurred that night is depicted on the inside. You can see there, right? That's the other side of it. This side is the one, my slides show it more clearly in context, my own slides, but this is the one, if we have it on the test, this is a good clear photo. It's the one I'd be using. So if you're curious, that scene you just saw is on this side of the lower archway. It's above eye level. You can see from the tourists standing there looking up and some guide explaining all this to them. It's a pretty important moment in the history of the world, really, but especially, quote unquote, the Western world, because it did affect, obviously all kinds of other things, events, and conflicts that occurred because of the event. Because the Arab tribes that lived all around Israel, they were pre-Arabic, this is what they would have called it back then, were imported into that land by the Romans. And of course, now they've been there for almost 2,000 years. So ergo, that conflict, so-called Arab-Israeli conflict, I think that's still the word everyone uses, had its roots right there, that day, that night, commemorated in stone for 2,000 years on the inside of the archway of this monument. Okay, formal analysis. Balanced, completely, as all Roman structures were, whether they're monuments, arches, aqueducts, buildings, temples, they always made everything symmetrical. But you could make the case, and I would agree, that it is unbalanced toward the top because of all the empty space. If you use that as just about it, remember, this is the original structure, not that. So if you draw the midline where it would normally be across the middle of the original archway, you'd have to say that there is more mass above the midline because of the fact that the arch fills it, the stone above the arch, and that fills in the upper part. So it's unbalanced toward the top, balanced, totally symmetrical left to right. The rhythm should be obvious, the columns here. And these are victory angels. My slide is, again, it's a little more clear because of how close I could get to it when I took the photo. You'll see that on Wednesday. But anyway, these you could just say there are, patterns of carved figure. Well, you saw the ones of the soldiers, sacking the temple. Obviously, they are very similar in their shapes. The soldiers, roughly all the adult males wearing Roman togas. So there's obviously powerful rhythm, both on the inside of the archway and on the exterior of the monument itself with the columns and the carved angels. These are victory angels, they're called. Okay, then is it stable or dynamic? It's both. More stable to me, though, than dynamic, because the overall shape of the monument is pretty much all right angles, except the opening of the arch. Whereas the figures are marching pretty much straight upright. Those ones stealing all those objects, right? They're pretty much all stable, aren't they? But there are dynamic details like the menorah, the tops of their heads, of course, and so forth. So it's got both stable dynamic elements. The simulated texture is the real texture on the outer side, the walls. You see the walls of the monument itself. That's smooth marble. So it's smooth, real marble texture. But you definitely would want to mention that there's a realistic simulated texture done with carved line, obviously, on the soldiers and the other figures. I think the other one has horses. Let's see if whoops, I went too far the other way. We'll get to that in a minute. Let's see. It's been a while since I've been to Rome. So yeah, horses, probably some soldiers. So there's simulated and real texture. Simulated mostly on the underside of the arch where the bas-relief panels are and where these two angels are. The rest of it's real texture of smooth marble. Here, the line is carved on, the soldiers and the bas-relief decorations on the arch. And also the columns have carved line. However, there is visual line. There is always an architecture around the edges where the modeling is the natural shadows, of course, created by the sun. And that creates visual lines, as it always does in any piece of architecture. Okay, the largest mass, well, it's one mass. You could make that case, but if you want to break it down, you would probably say the outer walls, if you want to divide it into sections, are the largest mass. And then these two, the main archway would be the second largest, because that's really one single section of stone, right? This arch here that holds up the rest of the monument. And then the third largest mass would be the two panels, the two bas-relief panels below the archway, which are of course on the inside of it, and they're equal size. So they'd be the third largest mass. And then we have for color, it's a cool gray color. I mean, it almost looks white in some lights, but that still would make it cool, right? So because there's no contrast with black and gray shades the figures or any other decorations on it. So it's pretty much just a cool, you can say off-white or grayish white. Okay, and rhythm ballet. Oh, for space, that's kind of important. It's one large monument with about a 50-foot high. Sorry, let me rephrase. I apologize. It's about a 50-foot tall monument. Don't mind the entire height up to this, right? The cornerstone, with about a 40-foot tall archway in the middle. That's all. Yeah. And then there is, oh, sorry, there's overlapping of the figures. Yes, you'd want to add that on the two panels on the inside of the arch. Those figures have overlapping as the only other technique. I don't think there's foreshortening. Let's just double check. I don't see foreshortening here. Not really. It's too one-dimensional or two-dimensional, I should say. So what you have is just overlapping on the carved figures inside the archway, and then the real space, of course, again, is the height. The main structure, 50 feet tall, with about a 40-foot tall archway in the middle. Okay, we've covered everything on this one. It's a pretty important one, so make sure you keep those notes when you're studying for the midterm. Okay, any questions? Anybody about this? All right. The next must know is, let's see, gotta shift gears because I was looking at my list of terms. Now, give me just a second. This is the column of Trajon, or some say Trajan. I've heard it pronounced both ways in Italy itself, so it could be either way. But the spelling is what matters. And of course, again, you guys all by now know, like a broken record, I know, but I keep reminding you, don't get too worried about the spelling of any of the words from the syllabus, because you'll have it in front of you. I assume you all will have that with you when you take the exam, which will be given in real time, but then you'll have till midnight to submit the papers. Oh, speaking of which, no, that's sorry. Yeah. If you haven't turned your paper in on time, I meant to say this before we segued into the slide lecture portion. If I were you, I'd try to get it in well before the midterm, because I've never seen it, almost never fails, the people that wait and get themselves backed up or backlogged, whatever, which one to use, by, not submitting their first paper till after the midterm. And then they've got two papers and a final to study for, plus all their other classes. Not a good formula for success. So if you haven't turned, I've gotten only two. I did say that, but I didn't make it that specific. And we had a few people join us late. So if you're one of those remaining handful that haven't turned your papers in yet, please try to do so in the next week or so would be advisable, right? Because next week we're segueing into reviewing and you should start studying for the midterm. Okay, so this is the next must know. Again, I'll spell these words. Column of Trajon or Trajan. Column, you probably but it is an odd spelling. It's not phonetic. COLUMN. There's that odd N at the end. Column of Trajan or Trajon, and that's, of course, capital T R A J A N. And the location, against the city of Rome, and it's 113, not 1113. I was pushing it ahead thousands. 113 AD or CE. So this is also from the golden age, you could call it. That's a fine phrase to use. It's used a lot by historians, or you can say the high point of Roman power and wealth and stability of the Roman Empire. The Pox Romana. This was created also during that period, that 200+ year stretch of time. By the way, Pox Romana ended with Marcus Aurelius. And if any of you have seen the movie Gladiator, I don't think there's a better movie in the last 20 years, at least. I think it was about that. Wasn't it 2000? It was over 20 years. Right? About Rome during the golden age we're talking about, during the period of the Pox Romana. Then that movie, Joaquin Phoenix plays, right, the next emperor who began the slow, uneven, but steady decline of the Roman Empire, because he was so corrupt. He didn't kill his own father, Marcus Aurelius. Those two characters from history were real people. Marcus Aurelius was the last emperor to rule during Pax Romana. When he died in 180, that's when the slow decline of the empire began. And yes, his son Commodus, played by Joaquin Phoenix, was cruel and inept, and yes, did supposedly, you want to say it, sleep with some close relative of his. According to those parts are correct, but he didn't suffocate his father with a pillow. That his father died of natural causes. Just in case you've seen that movie, right? And wondered if that was how one of their best Roman emperors died. That's not true. He died of natural causes. All right, so what are we looking at here? We're looking at the bottom of a 130-foot tall marble victory column. I'll say it again. We are looking at the bottom section of a 130-foot tall marble victory column. Now, victory columns are another Roman invention, but I think you got enough already of Roman, related terms to know on your list of terms, so I didn't add that. And they are less prominent in the world today than Triumphal Arches. But now I'll bet no one will get this, but I'll give you guys a clue. Can anybody think of a Triumphal Arch that is recent, let's say within the last 150 years in this country? Some of you must have seen it. I'll give you a clue. If you've been to San Francisco at Christmas, and you've looked at the Christmas tree, that 70-foot tall tree they always put, take a look at right around it. Anybody know what I'm talking about? What part of, well, obviously I said San Francisco. Anybody know there is a Triumphal Arch, and it's huge? Anybody know that one or have seen it? Nobody's been to Union Square in San Francisco? Nobody? Really? Oh, no, I got to believe somebody have. Maybe I know during the pandemic it was not convenient. I guess traffic was continuously clogged if you could even get to the city. And then, of course, you could get out of your car and walk up to look at the tree and take pictures, which you will be able to probably next Christmas. Okay, that's a Triumphal Arch. It's the Dewey column, as in the American admiral, who won a victory over the Spanish Navy in the Philippines, which created our colonial empire, relatively modest size-wise as it was compared to European colonial empires, in 1898. That column is dedicated to that victory, and it was finished before. It's pretty fast. They put it up before the end of that year. I think it's dated on the base. It says 1898. That's a victory column. And I think there's a couple others back east. I can't think of which cities, but I'm sure there are, at least probably in New York. Don't know of any actually not in Washington, D.C., surprisingly, but anyway, yes, victory columns, and there are some all over Europe, in almost every major capital, certainly Rome and Berlin, not to the World War II era, but to earlier German military victories. The one in Berlin is one of the biggest in the world. It's in the middle of their huge park, their central park. And there's always peace rallies held around it, including this last 10 days since the invasion of Ukraine. And it's ironic because that's a military monument, of course, to some earlier German victory, I think, during the Prussian War. Yeah, that's what it was, 1870s. So yes, there are victory columns all over the world that are imitating the Roman invention. This is the only one still standing in Rome. There were many of them, but this one's still standing in its original base. It hasn't ever fallen down, even through world wars and earthquakes and everything. So it's the original column and on its original base, and now we'll say what it's commemorating. The victory over the Dacians. Now that's going to sound strange, but actually, once again, there's a current events connection here. Dacia, I'll spell it slowly for you. It was an ancient kingdom on the border of the Roman Empire in Eastern Europe. D-A-C-I-A-N, Dacia, it was called, but the Dacians, D-A-C-I-A, the kingdom was the kingdom of Dacia, and the people from there, of course, were called the Dacians, were very warlike people in exactly the part of Europe that is on the edge of what's happening now, Romania. Today, it's the country of Romania. Now, it doesn't take too much of a connection, logical thinking process to say, wait a minute, why is a country in Eastern Europe named Romania, R-O-M-A-N-I-N, because of this event? Again, we see echoes from 2,000 years ago of ancient history in the modern world. Romania is right up against the border. If you didn't know, there's like 700, no, what am I saying? It's over 1.5 million refugees have left Ukraine already. And about 250,000 have gone to Romania because they're on the border with Ukraine. So here's how to write that. Dacia was a very warlike kingdom, which was on the border of the Roman Empire, and is located where Romania is today. Romania was spelled that the current, I should say current country, it's not new, is named after the fact that the Romans crushed that kingdom, wiped it off the face of the earth because they rebelled twice. It's bad enough if you rebelled against the Romans once and you lost a battle. They might leave your population alone and just put the fighting age men in slavery, maybe, and those they didn't kill in battle. That's what happened. The Dacians rebelled against the Romans twice. First, they attacked the empire. It wasn't part of the Roman Empire the first time, so the Romans conquered it. And that's what we're seeing here. These are Roman soldiers marching across the Danube, the biggest river in Europe. It's not the Rhine, it's a Danube, D-A-N-U-B-E, if you want to spell it correctly. Danube River, which was on the border of the Roman Empire, was their border. And they said, okay, we're tired of being raided constantly by these warlike Dacians, so let's take over their kingdom. They did, but they didn't massacre the population the first time. They just, like I said, sold the fighting age men into slavery. Somewhere else, of course, in the empire. And then the Dacians somehow, I don't know how many years, a few years, not many years, let's just say a few years later, they rebelled again. So I'm not sure where they got their fighting men from, but they somehow were able to have a second rebellion. And then the Romans march in and just completely massacred the entire population of what once was the kingdom of Dacia. And how did it get named Romania? Well, it became, of course, part of the Roman Empire, the former Dacian kingdom, and it was repopulated. This should sound familiar if you know your history of what's happening now, but the background to what's happening in Ukraine. The Romans repopulated what was once the kingdom of Dacia, now was an empty wasteland with Roman citizens, farmers, merchants, craftsmen, and created their own new Roman-based population. And guess what? That's the only country in Eastern Europe that speaks a Latin-based language. If you ever go to Romania, I've been there, you hear people speaking a Latin, it's almost like Italian, very similar to Italian. And that's not a coincidence. It's a direct result of this event that this column commemorates. And of course, if you don't know, there's the connection. You don't have to write this part, but Crimea was repopulated by Russian-speaking, not Ukrainian people, by Stalin. He literally took all of the Ukrainians off of the Crimean Peninsula and shipped them out to Siberia, the ones he didn't kill after World War II, and then inserted a Russian-speaking population. So when Putin did his thing, in 2014, some of you know this, he took over the Crimea without firing a shot. Probably that's the only part of what's now Ukraine that didn't oppose him because they had a majority Russian-speaking people. Same situation happened with the Romans here. After wiping out the local population, they brought in their own farmers and merchants and craftspeople to populate what's now the country of Romania, which got its name from that very event. And that's why their language is a Romance language, right? Latin-based. Okay, so here we have Neptune. Right, that's the last part of the meeting. Now, what are these scenes? Just a couple of details is all you need to have if it's on the exam. Yeah, yeah, I have to remember. I had to disconnect it because I had a problem with. Whoops, it's going to take me about 10 seconds. There we go. It's reconnected. My apologies for the minor disruption. Yeah, the cord falls out of the back of the laptop more often than it should. We're okay now. It won't happen again. All right, so let's start over. The scenes, all you have to write is a couple of lines about these, and that would be more than enough if it's on the essay part of the midterm. This is the bottom scene depicts Neptune, because he's a Roman god, right? The god of the seas, helping the Roman soldiers cross the river. You should write the river. It's if it's on the exam. Danube, D-A-N-U-B-E, which was the border between the Roman Empire and the Dacians. So they're invading Dacia, literally, these soldiers, with the help of their god of the seas, right here, which, by the way, any large body of water was Neptune's terrain, according to Roman religious belief. Here they're constructing a siege fort, right? They're making a fort of the, from scratch, well, from stones that they brought in to help, take over one of the major Dacian cities, siege, S-I-E-G-E, of course, that's an attack on a city. So they're preparing to besiege or conduct a siege of a Dacian fort by making their own, right? And then bringing weapons in. And it's an unusual tactic, but the Romans were, of course, the best military machine, obviously the most successful for centuries, 500 plus years. They maintained what was then the biggest empire that had yet been seen in the Western world. Now, these up here, you don't have to mention, they're after they won a battle, these are some of the Roman officials, I guess, taking over the local sites in Dacia. But the bottom two panels, you could just summarize with those two lines. Any questions now about the meaning? Because we'll do a formal analysis now. We're going to do one more must know, and then I'm going to end a little early. So we'll finish what I think will only be one or two more slides, must know slides from the syllabus on Wednesday, and spend the bulk of the time looking at the my own slides, which includes one of the must knows that I don't have as good an image of from the internet as the ones I took, because I wrote my BA thesis or a paper. I can't remember if it was a thesis or not, but an undergraduate paper, a research paper on the last must know, which is absolutely spine tingling when you know what you're looking at. It's called the Arapakis. We'll see that on Monday. And that one I won't cut from the study list. I'm not saying I might or might not cut this one. The last slide, though, yes, I did say, everybody got that? I think everyone was, with us at that point. By the time we got to the first must know, that slide, Titus, is one that's very important. This one may or may not be on the study list. When we do the review, we'll cut that list down by 40%. That'll be next week before the exam. So you won't even have to think about the slides that are taken off of the syllabus study list because there's no chance those will be on the midterm. Okay, let's do a formal analysis. I wish I had one of the column itself. I don't, so we'll do this one, the next must know. I do of my own slide. So just say this is the bottom section of 130. So here's for space. Okay, let's start with of the 9 elements for this slide. For space, what we have is a 130-foot tall marble column with 1/3 life-size figures. There are over 5. I should have said this one fact. I'm sorry, one last fact. I should have said this with the notes on the meaning. You should add there are over 5,000 figures, individually carved figures on this monument, on this column, over 5,000. So those are roughly, actually, they're more like 1/4. Yeah, I've stood in front of it. This is eye level. If you stood in front of the monument of this column, where it is right above the Forum, by the way, it's one of the most famous spots in any city in the world. Of course, it's the center of what was once the Roman Empire and the ruins of it. It's called the Forum. So it's near the Forum, and this is eye level. The first panel you'd be looking at, if you're adult height. So I can tell you these are 1/4 size. So on space, again, the total height I already gave you, but then for techniques for space on each panel, of course, these are bas-relief panels, right? You would say that they are roughly 1/4 life-size figures of Roman soldiers. And there is both overlapping, foreshortening, and diminishing, or actually 3 things: overlapping course of the soldiers over each other and the buildings behind them. There is foreshortening and diminishing size on these buildings you see in the distance here, which they had probably, that would have been the Roman city, whatever that city was. You have to write that, but these would have been Roman buildings. They come from the Roman Empire across the border where the river is into Dacia. So those Roman buildings in the background do have both foreshortening and diminishing size. So those are the 3 techniques for space here. The modeling, of course, being bas-relief by definition, is going to be the natural shadows created from the sunlight. There's no other technique. Simulated texture is superb. Whoever they hired, these were the best sculptors in Rome who did this. Of course, they would have wanted that. The government, probably the emperor himself, hired them. So what you see is on their armor, right? It's really realistic on their clothing, on their faces, their hair and beards, and on the fortresses that they're in, and even on the wooden boats. They're using wooden boats to create a temporary bridge across the river. I'm sure they built a permanent one later after they finished their conquest. So the boats have good realistic wooden, similar texture, and of course the armor is metal, and then there's the hair and the skin, including on Neptune himself. All of that is very realistic, similar texture, done with carved line. That's the only kind of line here. And then the largest mass, that's hard to say, but in the bottom panel it would have to be Neptune. And then it depends if you count these boats, because they put wooden planks over them to make it a single kind of a walkway. You could call that the second largest mass, or you could call the gate they're marching through. And then each individual soldier, they're pretty much the same size, same height. So there would be the third largest masses. Color is a cool gray. Definitely there's discoloration up here from centuries of being out in the open weather, but that's not the natural color. It was always original kind of cool gray color. And there you could say there's the real texture of the marble, but you don't really see it here, do you? Maybe a little tiny bit up there. So you could just focus on if it's on the exam, on the simulated textures. Balance, yes, each panel is balanced. Roughly equal numbers of figures or objects, plus the fortresses, and then the soldiers are about the same area, and here the same thing. These fortresses roughly equal the width of the soldiers marching off onto the right side, so they're roughly balanced each panel. And then we have the rhythm of the top to bottom. I meant to say the balance is both top to bottom and left to right on each panel. The rhythm is, of course, the repeated shapes of the human figures, the soldiers with their arms and legs and heads, and then the fortresses around them, the stonework and so forth. That's lots of rhythm. Okay, and let's see, am I forgetting anything? Space, volume, balance, modeling. I think I've covered that. Okay, we have, what we'll do is, like I said, in a few minutes early, but we have one more must know. Let's see, I don't think I forgot anything on that texture modeling. I always think I'm forgetting something before I go on to the next slide. All right, this is, for today, will be our last must know that we're going to cover. And it's the longest title of any of the Roman slides. And this 2-week topic we're doing on ancient Roman art. The equestrian statue of Marcus Aurelius. Equestrian is EQUESTRIAN, equestrian statue of Marcus. That's probably obvious, but that's his first name, Marcus Aurelius, AURELIUS, Marcus Aurelius, who was a Roman emperor. We'll say who he was. Really important to know that. If this were on the exam, that would be part of the meaning. Rome, 175 AD. Okay, so Marcus Aurelius was the last emperor to rule during Pax Romana. I've already explained that term, so obviously you should already know what that means. So he was the last emperor to rule during the Pox Romana, and some say he was the most enlightened Roman emperor until Constantine. So you could just say one of, the safe way to say it is he was one of the more enlightened, or you could say humanitarian emperors. What does that mean? Well, he temporarily stopped the persecution of the Christians. I don't think the whole 20 years he was emperor, for 20 years, that they'd stopped doing that, any kind of oppression, but he temporarily stopped that kind of, certainly the executions anyway, of the Christians, in the Colosseum. And he was trained as a philosopher. He wrote books and taught as like a professor would be today, philosophy, and wrote books about it, had them published. Publishing back then, of course, was very slow. Everything was hand printed, but his books were popular among the educated classes. So he was a very highly educated man. He came from an academic background. He was trained as a philosopher. He was both a writer and a teacher. And then he became emperor of the biggest empire in the world. And he could have, of course, used his power any way he wanted. But if you know the movie Gladiator, that's Richard Harris, who played him, of course, was Dumbledore, right? The main character in the first 3 Harry Potter movies. He also, same actor, right? Irish actor. If don't write this part, of course, but Richard Harris is the one who played him in that movie. And again, I've already said this. You could add if you want. He did not die by being suffocated by his own son. He died of natural causes. He ruled though for 20 years, and during his time there were battles, definitely battles, but not whole big wars or campaigns at the border of the empire. There always were, rebellions along the border throughout the Roman Empire's history. So he did have to fight some wars, and he hated doing that. He was much more of a peaceful-minded emperor than most others. Many other emperors decided to invade just on their own. Sounds familiar. Neighboring countries because they could, or even when they weren't in any way threatened, or again, very familiar situations. But he never did that. He just maintained the empire within its current borders. He was very popular. And that was a period of prosperity in the Roman Empire. So this is a twice life-size bronze sculpture of that emperor, Marcus Aurelius, riding his favorite horse. And apparently that horse lived most of the time, or was his main horse during most of his time as emperor. So this is a, image of him as emperor. And you can see he's not dressed in armor or carrying a weapon. So in a peaceful mode, you could say, or peaceful pose here. Reaching his hand out in essence to, administer justice, as what, of course, they all said they were doing, right? All the emperors said that, but he actually was trying to do that. And what happened to it? It disappeared. It was buried for 1,500 years, this statue. Well, no, it's more like 1,000. So just say about 1,000 years, because that's right. The Roman Empire would have kept this statue. And then when Rome fell until the Renaissance, just say over 1,000 years. For over 10 centuries, it was lost, and people thought it was gone, destroyed in one of the invasions, barbarian invasions of Rome. But it was found during the Renaissance, buried under rubble and dirt, and it was erected in this plaza. And this is the last part of the meeting now. This is the city hall of Rome, so it's their main plaza, like Civic Center, right, or Civic Plaza, where Michelangelo designed that building, the one I'm pointing to here. That's City Hall. It was designed by Michelangelo. But this statue was misidentified. That's the last fact about the meeting, is that I think it's almost comical that the Catholic Church put an inscription on the base when they re-erected it saying Constantine, an emperor from 130 years later, the first Christian emperor. And we'll talk about him when we finish after the midterm. We'll start early Christian and Byzantine art. So they thought it was, they thought it was the first Christian emperor, Constantine. Don't ask me how to spell, just like it sounds, Constantine, or you can just say the first Christian emperor who lived over 130 years later. It wasn't, of course. It was an enlightened man who was not a Christian, but he didn't persecute the Christians, or at least had to stop the executions of them. But they finally figured, by the time they figured that out, people liked the statue. So it was left in the plaza until about 30 years ago. It was deteriorating with the pollution. Rome's got a lot of air pollution. It's a very crowded city. So they put the original statue in a museum. It's the last fact about the meeting. And this is the original statue. So this is a very old slide. The model, or copy, that's what it is, a copy, full-size copy, is what's in the plaza now. The actual statue is protected by being inside a museum on display, which I've seen. Very impressive. Okay, those are all the facts. Let's do a formal analysis, and then I'll stick around for as long as people might have questions about anything we've just covered, or of course your grades or extra credit, or the upcoming exam. Well, most of that we're going to deal with next week when we do the review. Okay, so the first thing, what color is it? Well, this is very misleading. It's what happens to bronze. Some of you know this. If you've ever seen bronze sculpture, there are plenty in parks all over the Bay Area, especially in San Francisco, if mobs haven't torn them down. And there were dozens in Golden Gate Park torn down one night by mobs. Anyway, so what you see here is bronze. It was a warm color, and you can tell that from the face of the horse pretty much. Whoops, I'm sorry, I meant to focus on that. Yeah. The original color was warm, but you could say, if you want to get really specific, that it has become a cool parts of this sculpture, particularly the rest of the horse's body and some of the emperor's body has become a cool green color because of oxidation. That's that's with an OX, oxidation. It's when the air and moisture from the rain causes the color to change. Bronze changes from a golden kind of almost brown color, in other words, warm color, into cool green. So write it however you want there. It was originally all warm. It's superb from simulated texture, of course, done in every detail of his tunic, his face, his hair, the horse's body, the horse's face. All of that, of course, was done with a carved line. And as you all know, bronze sculpture starts out as marble. Sorry, I meant clay, obviously cast and then cast in marble. So that's actually originally carved line. The two objects, the base was added later. So, well, this is part of the original base. So you could say three. The three largest objects, pretty obvious. The horse is the largest, then Marcus Aurelius, or just you could say the emperor, and then the base. It's balanced, yeah, completely balanced, because he's in the middle on the horse's back, and the horse has all four legs. He has both of his legs and both of his arms. So it's balanced. If you stood in front of it, it would look balanced too, because his other arm is down by his side, but extended. And the horse's legs, of course, are. Now, some people would say it's unbalanced. I would agree, toward the upper half, if you divide it top to bottom, roughly across the bottom of the horse's body, because of the more obviously objects above that, with only the horse's legs and the lower part of the emperor's legs in the bottom. So it's unbalanced toward the top, balanced left to right. Rhythm is rather obvious with the repeated shapes of the arms, hands, and the folds of the robes of the emperor, and of course the horse's body, and the faces of the two objects, and all four legs of the horse. Then we have for space, I mentioned twice life size, but so that would be he'd be 12 feet if he stood up. He was a tall man, so if he stood up, he'd be 12 feet tall. But the height of it now, having stood here, is something around 10 feet from the base to the top of the emperor's head. That's the real space. But of course, there is one technique for space, and that would be overlapping, obviously, the clothing overlapping the emperor's body, and him or his body overlapping the horse. And it is mostly stable. Look carefully, because this horse, even though one leg is extended, it's almost straight up and down. And of course, a horse has, some kind of an angle, so there's some dynamic detail, but the emperor's body is upright. His arm is out at a right angle. His legs are straight down, and they're both looking straight forward if you would stand in front of it. So it's more stable than dynamic, but of course, it has some dynamic details on the heads of the two figures and parts of the horse's body, I guess, the front of the body there. Okay. Think I've covered. Modeling. It's just the natural shadows from the sunlight. There is no technique for modeling. Okay, I think I've covered everything on this. So let's see. Any questions before I stop the slide share about this or any of the slides we just saw? And then I'll stick around for any questions you may have. Okay, anybody have any questions that you want to ask about anything we just covered or anything relating to grades? Anybody? This is a good opportunity, because like I said, the main thing I've noticed is this semester, more than most, for whatever reason, who knows, that very few people have done any extra credit, and those that have not done more than, well, one person has 20 points, not even half of the max. Remember, the total maximum possible points for every class I teach in one semester length course is 20 points. 60. The most anyone has done is 20. So that allows 40 more even for that person, and everyone else, almost everybody else, has up to 60 extra points. And of course, some people don't need that and they don't want to take time to do it. That's fine. But just as a margin for error, a cushion, of some kind for your, future grades, not knowing for sure, of course, how you're going to do on the midterm and final, you might want to at least do part of the extra credit. Okay, any questions about anything we just covered? The test, let's hold those questions, of course, for next week when we do the review. But I did give back the papers, and I imagine some of you there were very many A's. That was the good news. But again, not everybody did get an A or B. And if you weren't one of those, you shouldn't be discouraged, because there's quite a bit of opportunity for you to make up those few points. And like I said at the beginning, a couple people joined us after that. You then also will have the advantage of knowing what you didn't do correctly or completely, what you were missing on the actual first paper, so that you shouldn't have that. Hopefully, if you just compare your grade from the first paper while you're working on your second, you should be able to make sure you don't miss those same points and get a much better grade on the second paper. Pretty much straightforward process, as long as you follow the requirements. Okay, anybody have any questions now? Because we're down to our last, I usually go to 4:15 and then I start this, but I stick around. This is my office hours and your chance to ask questions in real time. Okay, we'll give it a little bit more of an opportunity for anybody who's joined late or has a question that just they don't have yet, haven't asked. Don't forget, of course, I check my email 5 days a week, no, 6. The one day a week I don't check it is usually Saturday, because that's family time for me. Otherwise, I'll get back to you within 24 hours. If it's a Friday evening or Saturday daytime, you won't hear from me till Sunday. That's just a heads up, within 48 hours. Otherwise, it should be a 24-hour turnaround, if not the same day, for any question you ask by email or voicemail throughout the rest of the semester. Well, maybe spring break. I probably will go somewhere for 2 or 3 days. Like I hope some of you will. Now that it's safe somewhat to travel to places outside our own safety zones. Okay, anybody else? Any questions from anybody? One more chance. All right, thank you guys. Yeah, and I think now there's some things out there you can go see, right? Like the victory column. I mean, most people don't even know what that is, that column in Union Square. And there's an extra credit option for you. Take 4 photos of it, 10 points, right? And just label it. And of course, make sure you put your full name and the class you're in, and make it a PDF with 4 color photos. And Union Square, well, it's safe now, I think, right? I mean, certainly it's allowed. People can go there if they want. You can take a BART train from, well, you'd have to get to where there are BART stations, of course, which would be the North Bay. Someday they'll extend BART to the North Bay. Anyway, there is a BART station right there, right? If you didn't know that. And it's like a block or 2 from Union Square. Just a suggestion for one other extra credit option that probably most of you wouldn't have thought of. All right, last time, one more call for any extra. Anybody have any questions? All right, thank you guys. We'll see you on Wednesday. I think you're going to find the slides, my slides of Rome, where you don't have to take notes. We still have one very important must know. That'll be the first slide, and then we'll segue into the slides I took of Rome itself, and we'll probably still end a little early then too. All right, goodbye, you guys. Take care. See you in a couple.
Thank you.
Bye.
See you Wednesday.
I have a question about my paper.
Sure.
So I know for sure that I turned mine in, but I haven't received it. I don't know if it got lost.
Oh, I
or-
sent a grade. Who is this? Is this Victoria or Rachel?
Rachel.
Oh, Rachel. Hang on. I think I know what it is. Hang on. I actually, yeah. No, I did return that grade, and I don't want to say, anything about the grade itself, but you would have no reason to worry or be disappointed if you've seen it. So I don't know if you want to just, thank you for checking. No, you turned yours in on time. And I had it graded by my reader, and I double checked the grade. I always do of the reader before I entered it. I don't want to say it's not appropriate. The college has a policy of confidentiality, but I'm going to double, triple check. I know I entered it, and I know I returned it. It was yesterday, actually, but give me a moment here. Let's see. There we go. Your last name, Hemans. Okay. Yeah. No, I think you'll be happy. You'll be glad to know you got a good grade, but rather than give you the exact, that's, like I said, not really appropriate with the understandably enforced policy. I've never violated it, of individual confidentiality. Just send me an email. I don't know why I sent it to whatever the email address was on the paper itself when you turned it in. So
Okay, maybe it got lost or something, and I couldn't find it.
Well, I will do it. I can do it today. I can do it. I have another class in about an hour, 3-hour evening class, but it needs to set up, of course, for it. But I have a window of about 30 minutes. I can go out to because it's stored on my regular computer. I call it mainframe. People tell me, no, what are you mainframe? What are you IBM? Or, I meant, desktop, the big heavy computer that has more storage than my laptop. So your grade is stored there. I will forward it to you, but why don't you email me first so I can hit reply and put it as an attachment.
Okay, yeah, I'll make sure before you do all of that if it's like.
Well, double
hidden-
check and send me an email either way. Let me know if you found it. Yeah, you
Okay.
won't be disappointed, but like I said, I can't give the exact grade out of public forum.
Yeah.
But I want you to have that, the exact, score. But I'm not sure if something went astray, then I probably could solve that by having a reply to an email. So send me an email either way. In the next 15 minutes? I'll go check in about 15 minutes in my studio's outside my house, the other computer.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah,
Okay, because I
thank you
want
so
you to
much.
have your grade. You did a good job.
Thank
All
you.
right. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
All right. Take care. All right. Anybody? Yes, Victoria? Did you-
Yes,
Sure.
I emailed you regarding the last assignment I submitted.
Okay, so I'll see an email, but you can ask me. I mean, I can respond by
Sure.
email too, if you want.
I just wanted to let you know.
Since this
just
is
wanted-
still a live forum being recorded, I should probably not. So,
Okay.
I know you'll have some questions, but I did send you, that actually was my commentary about different ways of, responding or dealing with, however you say, that. But if you have specific questions in an email, I can respond that way, which is probably best. Unless you want me to, I can call you because people never call my voicemail. It's 24/7. Doesn't wake me up. But I think if you want it by email, as long as it isn't like, 20 minutes worth of questions, that I wouldn't quite have that much time in this window. I have a
It's just-
window.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I understand. It was just to let you know that I will be doing extra credit
Okay,
for the
sure,
that assignment.
sure. Oh, okay. Well, I'll respond to your email. I always do confirm when I get an email, no matter what the topic is, unless it's like the night before a test or something, then I don't have time. All right, so I'll give you some kind of response, but thank you for giving me a heads up. I'll look for your email as well as,
No,
Gloria's. All right, that's it, I think, right? Anybody else? All right, see you guys. What's left? Remaining one or two of you on Wednesday. Okay,